my very beautiful babettes. I'm your resident active advocate. I apologize for my distinct lack of video yesterday, but I was kind of feeling like crap. So today I'm feeling better, and we are finally going to wrap up our little series on the AoDA. Yes! No more legal shit! Pardon my language, but this stuff is dry to me. So today's video is going to be the cleanup section of this series rather than the What Lily Left Out mini-series within this series. This one is more about what I actually got wrong as opposed to what I left out because, 8 years of university and 2 degrees later, I don't know how to research. So, because I am not an authority figure for obvious reasons, I encourage all of you, at least Ontario residents, because this is applicable more to you than to anyone else, do your research. aoda.ca. I will keep plugging that blog because it's very informative, and yeah, it's dry, but it's also very important. Because if we don't understand our own laws, then we're not going to be able to incorporate people with disabilities better into our society as functioning equals. And really, endgame-wise, that's the goal. The aoda said that we would have a fully accessible Ontario by 2025. Oh, you're adorable. But it's really the attitudinal barriers that I find to be more relevant to this issue. I know that the physical barriers are also very relevant, but those barriers come out of a lack of understanding the fact that, by the way, all range of different sorts of people need to be able to function in this society that has been created for us and kind of given to us. We're fortunate to be living in the kind of world we are living in, but it could still be better. And whose job is it to make it better? Ours. So, for the cleanup section, my consultant put together a very long email about all the things that I mucked up. So I narrowed it all down into a Word document. And yes, I did make sure that my face will still show on camera when I maximize the Word document, but I'm going to have to put the chair down a little bit because I am 5'1" and I cannot read at this height. So you'll probably be looking at me from about here, nose-wise up, for a little bit, just as I'm reading this. And then at the end of the video, I will back up and we can have a little chat. All right, so maximizing document now. All right, maximized document. Chair going down a little bit now. Perfect, gorge, love it. All right, so in no particular order, pregnant mothers / new mothers do not get the same accessible parking spots as people with disabilities get. As noble as it would be to give up our spots to people who might need them more, if they are not available to people who have to get their wheelchair out of the driver's side seat as well as themselves, that is not good. And noble as that sentiment may be, it is also kind of illegal. And again, I'm looking at you. If you do not have an accessible parking pass, don't use our spots. Thank you. Rule number 1 for life, don't be a jackass. We don't like those. Okay, next. Auditory street crossing signals begin when it is safe to cross and end when the perpendicular traffic starts again. That's the traffic going in front of you. All right, so wait a cycle if you don't get there at the start of the cycle. I got this information wrong. I had thought, because I haven't used these in a long time, that the signal starts up when you have about 5 seconds left for your crossing. That could potentially be a mortal error. So, for any of you out there who are like me, visually impaired or are blind, wait until you hear the traffic beside you going, rather than the traffic in front of you. And if you get there and the traffic beside you is already going, wait a cycle and then start crossing. Literally, this crap can save your life. And I don't want to jeopardize people's lives, which is why I have an external authority on these things, thank God. All right. Everything under the aoda are called standards, not regulations. I need to get my nomenclature right. I've been calling them regulations this whole time. They are called standards, not regulations. And this could be considered a potato-potato thing, but no, because if you're going to do proper research, you need the proper terminology. Next, employment standards. Access to all the same information as your coworkers, as well as specified safety plans for you should there be a fire or accident, and you are unable to follow the, quote, regular approach. So if you are, say, a wheelchair user and you can't get in and out of the front entrance very quickly during an emergency situation, there should be mapped out another path for you to go down. This was actually applicable at a place where I used to volunteer. The place had a basement, so how do you get out of there when you're in a wheelchair if there's a fire and the elevators are not engaged? So down in the basement, there was an alternate path for wheelchair users to use to get out of the building, should that have been the case. Thankfully, we never had to use that when I was there. Anyway. All right, next. Design of public spaces standard only covers new buildings or buildings in need of full-scale structural renovation for reasons unrelated to accessibility. Also covers sidewalks, outdoor play areas, and outdoor eating areas. I was actually not aware of the sidewalks one or of the outdoor eating area one. So technically I could have put this in the what Lily left out section, but I'm putting it here because I forgot. So there you go. That's going to be the case for a few of these. All right, transit. They must charge an equivalent amount and have equivalent hours of operation as, quote, normal transit. And buses must also announce what bus they are when they pull up to a stop. The stop must also be accessible, i.e. the bus shelter or the platform. Cannot charge extra for the transportation of service animals or assistive devices. That one I left out, but that one I feel is very important. If you get on board and you've got a dog, they're not allowed to say, oh, that'll be an extra this amount just because you have an animal with you. The animal and the device are ostensibly considered an equivalent of that part of the functioning of your body. So those should not be considered add-ons. Okay, that's not the proper way to see these. This is why I'm talking about attitudinal barriers being the base. All right, information and communication standard. Public sector and large private sector businesses must provide the same form of communication interpretation upon request. Some form of information interpretation upon request. So, okay, remember how I mentioned before that if you don't have a sign interpreter, you have to at least get someone who can type the information or text you the information, that kind of thing. Okay, but that also applies to many different forms of communication and, things like that. They have to take accessible devices and assistive devices into account when they are doing their training and when they are communicating with their customers. All right. This also covers accessible textbooks, library materials, as well as them having a built-in feedback process. Okay, so because it's part of the information standard, technology used in schools, like textbooks, like handouts, all of these sorts of things, communication used in schools, has to be made accessible. And usually, if you are a person with a disability going into school, you will get something called an IEP, which stands for Individual Education Program or Individual Education Plan. I can't remember. I'll look it up. But it follows you throughout the entirety of your schooling, at least up till post-secondary. If you go on to post-secondary, there are going to be different sorts of regulations that follow you there. But in all strata of education, you must be accommodated to an appropriate extent. All right. This also applies at the library. This is the reason, you're welcome, why audiobooks are a thing. Because of people like me. Whoop! You're welcome. Next. And last, customer service. All provided services must be listed in writing. Customer service training must be provided to all relevant employees. Warning, this area is severely lacking. And literally, she wrote me in the email, yeah, you might get a 15-minute session over your lunch break with no follow-up test. I've noticed that this occurs in the workplace because a lot of people seem to be out to sea when you ask for a particular kind of accommodation. And that, to me, is a manifestation of an attitudinal barrier, not just a physical one. All right, so hang on after that. Okay, notifications must be in writing about service interruptions to any accessible service. So that would include an elevator if you're a wheelchair user. That would include there being maybe a lack of interpreters for ASL or for any sort of screen communication program that you use. People who might not be able to dictate back and forth for you. But those are usually temporary interruptions. And they must, as this says, be listed in writing so that you know what your limitations are going to be going into a particular service. And lastly, a feedback process must be made available. This area is also somewhat lacking. I told you the story, I believe, about the manager at the store I went to with the inaccessible entrances, and how he gave me his email, but he never got back to me about that. Okay, so I'm closing the document. And there. And I am booping up the chair. Wonderful. All right, so thank God. That's the end of the AODA, I think. I think. Unless there's anything else I missed, that will be the end of this series. And we will be moving on to something a little more not legal, I'm hoping. I have to think of a new idea for information and material to come. But that is what I have for all you lovelies today, and I hope you have enjoyed yourselves as thoroughly, wink, as I have. All right, adios. Mwah. Bye!